I've been asked to introduce our moderator, who's behind me. And so I'll read a few notes about his very impressive background, his bio, as we call it. So Rick Garber served 32 years, full and part-time, in the Canadian Army, 18 of which were in this very building, as a member of the Royal Montreal Regiment, retiring with the rank of Lieutenant Colonel, having commanded the Brockville Rifles, where he is presently the regiment's honorary Lieutenant Colonel. He served in Canada, the United States, the United Kingdom, and Germany, and for a very short time in Israel. Rick is a graduate of McGill, Queen's, and Royal Military College, as well as the Canadian Army Staff College, Canadian Forces College, United States Marine Corps University, and NATO School. In civilian life, he is the Executive Director, Marine Personnel with Transport Canada. So I will turn over the evening to Lieutenant Colonel Rick Garber.
Bonjour à tous, c'est mon plaisir de vous souhaiter le bienvenu au mess des officiers du Royal Montreal Regiment et 34 Signals Regiment grâce au commandant des deux régiments. Thank you, John. Pleasure. In particular, I would like to thank Colonel Schoen for his amazing support over the last 3 weeks. It seems every other day I'm sending him the same email that begins with just one more small favor, John, to alert him that he's going to have to drop everything in order to help us out. Thank you, John.
Pleasure. Thank you.
There is additional poignancy in this being our venue tonight. This is a very particularly chosen location for this panel. I would encourage you, while enjoying the reception so kindly provided by Tova and the CJA team after our presentation, to read the plaque that's adjacent to the bar behind us. It's dedicated to a Jewish member of the RMR who is particularly important to so many of us whose lives he touched. Regimental Quartermaster Sergeant R.Q. Goldstein, who served in this regiment in wartime, in peacetime, and for some 30 years was the mess steward in this mess, looking after who he always called his officers. This evening we have the rare honor of listening to and interacting with a panel of Canadian Army veterans. Veterans with in excess of 150 cumulative years of service to Canada, to the Canadian Army. And this is so consistent with our theme of CJE and Canada 150. 150 ans comme officier, comme soldat, et comme leader à la Force Armée Canadienne. Permit me to share brief introductions of our panelists before we delve into their unique experiences as Jewish soldiers at war, on NATO and United Nations deployments, and in peacetime training. I'll begin to my left. Lieutenant Colonel Dr. Marcus Martin is no stranger to this mess. Dr. Marcus' long service as a military physician has included providing medical services to members of the RMR and 34 Signals. He has served us all well. His accomplishments, both medical and military, are numerous. Graduating as a medical doctor from McGill University, where he is both an associate professor of obstetrics, gynecology, and oncology, as well as an associate in geriatrics. He is a past national medical officer for the St. John's Ambulance and Veterans Affairs Canada's acting regional medical officer for Ontario. En uniforme, le lieutenant-colonel Martin avait commandé son unité, 51 Medical Company, et il avait servi avec distinction aux opérations des forces des Nations Unies à Chypre et avec l'OTAN en Afghanistan. At the far side of the panel, Having known Major General Edward Fitch for some 35 years, I know I had to count, General. And without slipping off my boots, I was able to do that, sir. I'm delighted to introduce not just a distinguished general officer tonight, but again, one who has personal connections with this armory and with this mess. His father completed his wartime service as an officer in this regiment, in the Royal Montreal Regiment. And if I'm not mistaken, he is found in the photograph, is he not, of the presentation of colors of the regiment on conquered foreign soil at the end of the Second World War. General Fitch est né à Montréal. Il a complété son formation académique au Collège militaire royal de Saint-Jean et Royal Military College, Kingston. His numerous command appointments include Commanding Officer, 1 Combat Engineer Regiment, Commander Land Forces Western Area, Acting Assistant Chief of the Land Staff of Canada's Army, and Project Manager for Land Force Reserve Restructure. He was awarded the Meritorious Service Medal for his work in the former Yugoslavia, and in recognition of his many accomplishments, was appointed an Officer of the Order of Military Merit. After a short retirement from the forces, a very short retirement, General Fitch was called up from the Supplementary Reserve in support of Operation Podium. That was the Canadian Forces' contribution to the 2010 Vancouver Winter Olympics. At the end of March 2009, Major General Fitch was promoted to his final rank, the rank of civilian, after 43 years' service to Canada. Centered on the panel, Honorary Colonel David Hart needs no introduction in his mess. But I will do so nonetheless. A McGill graduate and a distinguished Montreal-based chartered accountant, he's a CA, an FCA, and a life member of both the Ontario and Quebec CA organizations. Colonel Hart began his association with the military in 1931 as a cadet. In 1931. 86 years ago. Again, the math is not bad. As a young sergeant, he participated in the raid on Dieppe on August 19, 1942, for which he was awarded the Military Medal for Bravery by King George VI at Buckingham Palace in November 1942. I will pause for a moment to turn your attention to the well-known painting centered on the wall to my left, which depicts Colonel Hart at Dieppe earning the coveted military medal. Following officer training in Brockville, Saint-Jean, and Kingston, Colonel Hart was commissioned in 1944. Discharged from the Canadian Army Special Force at war's end, he immediately returned to serving in the reserves, rising to the rank of Lieutenant Colonel and command of 11 Signals Regiment from 1961 through 1965. From 1976 to the present day, I won't do the math this time, he has served as Honorary Lieutenant Colonel and Honorary Colonel of 712 Communication Squadron and now 34 Signals Regiment. Parmi les plusieurs médailles portées par le colonel Hart et ceux de chevalier d'honneur de la France. Mesdames et messieurs, je suis heureux d'introduire nos anciens combattants distingués, our distinguished panelists. The format for tonight will begin with me posing several questions to the panelists, each of whom will share with us their unique experiences as Jewish soldiers. If Tova agrees that we have time at the end, we should be able to open the floor to a few questions from this tremendous audience that we have, followed by the opportunity for us to mingle and share with one another during the reception that will be located in the anteroom. Gentlemen, what I'm going to do is with each question that I pose, I will ask you in the sequence from left to right or right to left to please share your answers, your responses with us, and we'll move on from there. This is not scripted. This truly is an opportunity for us to be able to hear verbatim from an amazing panel. First question I would like to ask, and I'll ask the same question of each of the three of you because I expect there will be different nuances, beginning with you, Dr. Martin. What was the most memorable accomplishment of your military career, sir?
To say, honors are always what people are always interested in, and they sort of count, but one of the things that I was most proud of is there's a lot of lawyers who walked around saying they were QC.
Could you talk louder, please?
Yeah, there's lawyers who are QC, Queen's counselors. But nobody knows, or very few people know, that the medical side of the house has something similar. Or if you're someone skilled with horses, you probably would be also getting what is called the Queen's Honorary something. So if you're a nurse, you could be a Queen's Honorary Nurse, QHN. And the thing that I was most pleased with was, as a reserve officer, it's unusual for reserve officers to get anything, was I got nominated as the Queen's Honorary Surgeon, so QHS. And it's one of those things that if you look it up, nobody knows what it is. That's okay, I know what it is.
Colonel Hart, most memorable experience.
There's so many. It's hard to say, but one of the most memorable experiences, of course, was the attack on Dieppe when I was there. But I hope it works.
It works.
Excellent.
It works. It works.
It works?
Yes.
In the attack on Dieppe, of course, it was a memorable experience because I was involved and I saw so many people getting killed, and I couldn't believe the order that was given when we had the Fusiliers de Montréal were a floating reserve, and the brigade GSO-1 gave them the order to attack and support the Essex Scottish, who were being brutally shot on the shore. And I couldn't believe the order that he gave, because I got back on the air. I was only a sergeant, but I said, "What the hell are you doing? It's a disaster out here. You're sending those people to death." He says, "It's too late, they're committed." That is one of the most memorable experiences I've ever heard in my life, from a senior officer to commit people to certain death. But I was also very pleased that when I got the order from the headquarters for all of us to come out an hour earlier than we were supposed to. They couldn't contact my right brigade, which was 6th Brigade, which had the South Saskatchewan Regiment and the Camerons of Winnipeg. Nobody was able to contact them to tell them the boats were coming in early. So I asked Control whether I could get off the air and try to contact them. And Control said, "I'm sorry, you're the only one we have in communication forward to all the regiments on the beaches and back to us at headquarters." So I pleaded with them. I said, "If you'll give me just 2 minutes, I'll try to contact them because I have an overlapping frequency, and I'll give them the order to come out." So they said, if you'll be back in 2 minutes, okay. I got off the air and started a search, and at that time the noise was absolutely terrible and the static was awful, but I finally was able to contact the 2 regiments, and I got hold of them, gave them the order to come out, and I got back on the air within 30 seconds. And I was pleased to report that I was able to start again to pass messages. But when I got back to Brighton at the end of the day, the intelligence who were debriefing me said, by that action, you saved at least 100 lives. So that was a really wonderful thing as far as I was concerned. There were others, but I'll pass this on to Ed Fitch now.
Thank you, Colonel David. Nobody's going to be able to top that story. My friend Colonel Garber, of course, asked a trick question. He said, what's your most memorable accomplishment? But indeed, memorable accomplishments are never achieved by individuals. It's only teams that do great things. And the 3 of us, we've all been blessed to be parts of great teams, and from time to time we had a role to play, but it was all part of that bigger team. Perhaps on a more personal note, in terms of memorable accomplishments, I'm reminded of a little saying my dad used to have. He'd say, you know, somebody asked him, what do you expect to get out of this war? He said, me. And I was blessed with 43 years of going from one adventure to another and survived them all. So in a sense, but that's of course not my accomplishment. Hashem was with me all the way. Other things that I consider memorable was that after all that my family was intact. And a great deal of the credit for that goes to my wife Sharon, who's sitting here in the front row. And without that kind of steadfast support, I mean, there were years when I'd be gone half the year, and on one occasion a whole year. You know, she held things together and sometimes single-handedly for extended periods raised our 2 daughters who are both wonderful young women today. So that's a great accomplishment there, but that's largely Sharon's. So having been part of many great teams, was there to take part in many memorable accomplishments, both in command but also on the staff, planning operations and developing policies, and like to think that together we made the world a little better place.
It reminds me of a story. My wife, who writes for the Montreal Gazette, when I was serving in Afghanistan, she wrote a little column. She said, you know, Marcus Martin, he's the worst dishwasher unloader in existence. He does not have any idea where the plates go or anything like that. But you know, I wouldn't mind having him home. And that was sort of something that I found out later, and it really touched me, because it's true, just like Ed said, when you're far away, you're in a different planet. In Afghanistan, we were allowed 5 minutes, perhaps a day, by telephone, and that was max, because we had a card and it would expire. You couldn't talk longer, and you were lucky if you got through, because it was by satellite. So just hearing that story, it made me feel happy. Not memorable, but happy.
Please keep the microphone, because I'm sticking with you, sir, for the next question. Now we're going to zero in a little bit more specifically for the remainder of the questions. And Dr. Marcus, what was the biggest challenge that you faced as a Jewish serviceman in your career?
You know, it always reminds me of the story. I have a classmate of mine who works with me at the hospital. we went to the same elementary school. It goes back a long time. And I was being deployed to Afghanistan in December. So he says to me, "Are you going to take your Chanukiah and candles with you in your barrett box?" I said, "I don't know, I don't think I have that much space." Not that it took up a lot of space, but I didn't actually bring it. So I was thinking of that story when as something that's typical Jewish, because he said, "Hey, are you going to do anything like that?" But that was one of them. Not perhaps your answer that you want.
There's no answer that I want but your answers.
As far as accomplishments are concerned, I guess there are many. I have so many, but I would like to bring up something that a lot of people don't know. There are three coincidences that I came across in the Army, and it has to do with my family, because my brother Ed and I had joined the Signal Corps back in 1937. We were both helping guard the, I did the Soulange Canal. My brother was with the Victoria Rifles doing the Lachine Canal. But we were called in for active service on the 7th of December, 7th of September, 39. And Eddie passed quite well because he's a little bit taller than I am. But the sergeant said to me, "We can't accept you." I said, "Why not?" He said, "You're half an inch too short." I began to make a noise, and the noise was so loud that finally the medical officer came out of his office and said, "Sergeant, what's the problem?" He says, "Well, this fellow won't accept his rejection, sir." He says, "What's wrong with him?" He says, "He's half an inch too short." So he looks at me, and my brother Paul also looked very much like Eddie and I did. And he looks at me, he says, "What's your name, soldier?" I said, "Hart." He says, "Hart, you got a brother Paul?" I said, "Yes, sir." "Is he in McGill COTC?" I said, "Yes, sir." He says, "Oh, we must have measured you wrong." He ruffled the hair that I had in my head and said, "Now you're at 5'2½". You'll be okay. The strange part of that is my brother Paul was 2 inches shorter than I am. That was the first coincidence. The second coincidence was when I was on an exercise called Exercise Spartan. And the name itself tells you the kind of thing. We were allowed 4 hours sleep a night and one meal every 48 hours. After about 3 weeks of wandering around England, we ended up in Oxford, and I was a sergeant at the time, and a bunch of young women came out of the offices, and one woman says, her name was Doreen Bellamy, and I began corresponding with her and told her that our men were very hungry, they hadn't had much to eat, so she organized a bunch of sandwiches for us at that time. Flash forward about a couple of months later, my brother Eddie and I went on a leave together. And we went to the Cumberland Hotel, and around the corner there was a movie theater. We went into it. And in the movie theater, there were two women sitting in front of us. The lights went up, and they looked around, and one of them says, "Oh, Sergeant Hart." So Eddie says, "Oh, it's not, you can't be talking to me, it must be Dave over here." So it was Doreen Bellamy. She introduced us to her girlfriend, and her girlfriend was Phyllis Parker. And my brother Eddie discovered that she lived about 2 miles away from where he was stationed. And it finally ended up that he married Phyllis. And his son Peter is here right now, and I don't know whether Peter ever heard that story, but this is the story. This is how the Eddie Hart family started. The third coincidence had to do with Rabbi Gershon Levy, who is the Jewish chaplain of the Canadian Army. And he visited me, and he visited Paul, and he visited my brother Eddie. But he was in France in a Jeep just after D-Day, and his tire was blown off, but he was right beside a military base. And they told him, you go to that base, and maybe their quartermaster will be able to give you a tire and so on, so you can continue on. So he goes to this major, who's the quartermaster of the U.S. military, and he introduces himself as Rabbi Gershon Levy from Montreal. And the major says to him, Rabbi Levy, he says, if you're from Montreal, would you know my cousins, the Hart boys?
No.
So he says, of course, I visited them just a few months ago and so on. It turned out that this major was my cousin Dave Nathanson, who was the head of the procurement for that unit in the American Army at that time. Those are three wonderful coincidences.
Did he get the tire?
He got the...
Your question, Richard, was the biggest challenge we faced as Jewish servicemen. In my case, I try and keep this story brief. So I was brought up in Montreal in a very Jewish environment. Not a very observant environment, but being Jewish was something we took for granted. And I left that environment overnight, became the only Jew in the Collège Militaire Royal de Saint-Jean. We were perhaps 300 students and another 150 or 200 faculty and support. And I was 17 years old. And a small truth came to me that created this great challenge that followed me on. And that truth is, if you're not prepared to respect your own religion, how can you expect anyone else to? It seems simple enough, doesn't it? How a 17-year-old kid came to that, maybe there was some guidance from a higher source. So that started a journey, my own personal journey of discovery of my Judaism, my heritage. And so my greatest challenge then was to keep true to that Judaism as my knowledge of it grew. And it's been a very rewarding challenge, but one that still goes on.
If I may add another story, it reminded me how being in the forces showed me what a great country we live in. And it's not that it's easy to understand. And I'm just going to throw in two quick stories. My first exercise was at Camp Wainwright, which is in Alberta. And it's muddy and rainy, and we were there in deployment doing the exercise for 2 weeks. We got dirtier and dirtier and dirtier. But the camaraderie there's nothing to explain. And I met people from the Atlantic provinces, from the Maritimes, from British Columbia, from Saskatchewan, and everybody, just as Ed said, worked cohesively as a team. And that's the beauty of it, which you don't see on the outside. And sometimes I get a little bit insulted when people make fun of the Canadian Forces not being equivalent to the state-of-the-art, whatever it is, some euphemistic concept, because Canadian soldiers are really some of the best in the world. But another story that reminds me of how great Canadian citizens are, here I am, a TAP, I'm an add-on to the Afghanistan troops that are already deployed there. It was the first rotation. And I'm flying from Montreal to London, and from London I'm going to be flying to Camp Mirage. And the stewardess or the flight attendant happened to be, by chance, one of my patients. And she came up to me and says, "What am I doing?" And I said, "Well, I'm actually going to be deployed in Afghanistan." So that's fine. You know, when you get to London, it's a bit of kerfuffle because everybody is fighting to get through customs. And as I'm deplaning from the plane, she gives me a bottle of champagne. And she says, "Drink it over there." When you're in Afghanistan. Of course, she didn't understand that there was no drinking in Afghanistan when you were deployed. But the concept that she was so kind that she gave me a bottle because she thought, hey, I want to show that I'm proud of you guys. And that's just one story that happened over and over again when I was with the forces.
We're going to move on to a somewhat more serious theme with the next question. In your military careers, have you encountered incidents of anti-Semitism? And if you did, how did you deal with it?
You know, it's interesting what misconceptions are prevalent among so many people. First of all, I have an unusual Jewish last name, Martin. Not too many Jews are called Martin. And yet, if I said I was working at the Jewish General as a surgeon or whatever, they would all think, oh, if you're at the Jewish General, you're Jewish. And I also happen to be a vegetarian for about 30-odd years. So naturally, when we got rations or we had food, I would say, well, I don't eat meat. They would say, oh, is that because you're Jewish? And I said, well, no. I mean, I appreciate what you're thinking, but no, I'm really vegetarian. And because of that, it was interesting to see the perspective. Now, I never asked for kosher meals or anything like that. I didn't even know if they existed. But in my later years, if I was on exercise in Canada, we never had this option as far as I recollect anywhere else when I was deployed overseas. But when I was in Canada, all of a sudden it became available that you could have halal rations. And I was surprised, but yeah, because this was the new norm in Canada. And that's what I saw was happening. It was like everything was more and more open. And so it's not unique to me to be saying, oh, it was only a Jewish issue. There were issues with, for example, the Sikhs, who I knew some Sikhs who had an issue about headgear. And they also had an issue. So it's not particularly that, oh, I was Jewish and I had a whatever Mogen David on my forehead, but it was, you could see that everybody is sort of the norm and everything is doing, and then all of a sudden somebody says, no, I want to do something different. And people sort of have a hiccup when that happens. So that's how I would respond to that. There was always a little bit of a hiccup, but then it was accepted.
As far as I was concerned, I was always, well, when Eddie was with me, where there were two of us, you were the only ones who were Jewish, and we never really had any problem with the Army as such. And I don't think I ever had anybody look at me as if I was a stranger, because I was one of the guys in the Army, and I had volunteered the same as they did, and every one of the guys looked at me as just an ordinary soldier. I will tell you one story that when I was commanding my unit over on Hillside Armory, and there was a change of command of the engineers, and there was a Colonel Wolf took over the engineer regiment at that time. And we had a reception, and General Prieur, who is our commanding officer, called Joel and I over together, and said, "Oh, come over here, I want to talk to you for a minute." He says, "Oh, I want to congratulate both of you on being the first ones to be the commanding officers of a kosher armory in Canada." And we looked at him. We couldn't believe it. But he meant it in the way that we were both Jewish and both commanding officers. And that's the only thing I ever had, as far as I was concerned. I didn't have a problem otherwise.
Thank you, David. We were trained from very young officers that there are 3 subjects that are not discussed. And the reason these 3 were listed was armies, units are always working very hard to establish and maintain very strong cohesion. That is the secret of winning battles. It's that cohesion that makes the many into one. There were 3 topics that could threaten that cohesion. One was religion, another was politics, and the third was, you'll understand, it was almost all men at that time, discussion of women by name. In spite of that, no, it's true that religion was something that generally was not discussed, and the Army is much more concerned with what you can do than where you worship on a Saturday or a Sunday or whatever. But as you can imagine, I've been asked this question a number of times. And the first time I can remember as a Major General was at a reception, and a woman came up to me and said, "General Fitch, did you ever experience anti-Semitism in the Army?" Maybe I had a drink. So I said to her, "Lady, I made Major General. If that was under anti-Semitism and you took it away, what would I be, Queen?" So I think I'll echo one of Dr. Martin's comments, that I think we were, the 3 of us, 4 of us here, many others in the room, we've been part of one of the purest meritocracies in Canada. And very proud of that, and you advance according to your skills and your effort and your accomplishments, and the rest doesn't matter.
Of course, it reminds me of another story. Here I was in Cyprus, and it's Christmas Eve. And Colonel Maisonneuve, who's going to become General Maisonneuve, he says to me, "I want you to lead one of the songs." You know, I don't think he knew if my voice was good, but he figured here I was an officer, and he couldn't care less about my religion. I was going to lead one of the songs. So I had to brush up on it very quickly. And I did.
I have one more story. I have one more story about that. One of my best friends was Barney Feinstein, the late Barney Feinstein. And he was a very distinguished soldier, and his wife is here, so I know that she's listening with a little bit of fervor. Barney proved to me that there is no anti-Semitism as far as the Army was concerned, because not only was he an honorary colonel, but he was the president of the honorary colonels of Canada, some 250 of them, and he ran it, and he ran that council like a wonderful guy, and he got all kinds of credit because he was a great soldier and a really great honorary colonel.
Thank you.